I'm Dane Rose. In many tribal cultures, one was not considered an adult or a safe member of the community until one had gone through a life-threatening initiation, an ordeal in which the child was challenged to face death and found within themselves a connection to something bigger, something transcendent, something bigger than the child that allowed them to survive the ordeal. And at this point, they were considered a safe member of society. We look at things through our human lens, through the lens of our ego, the lens of our culturated mind. But in more biological terms, we are a part of multiple ecologies. In the fractal nature of reality, the spiral repeats itself at bigger and smaller scales. And we, as a human body, are part of the fractal pattern of a family, are part of the fractal pattern of a community, of a culture, of a country, and of a species. At a biological level, we are a cell within the Earth's body. Much like any cell within the human body, the blood delivers nutrients and removes toxicity. It is the relationship with the larger body that keeps each cell alive. And in the intelligent relationship between cell and larger body, the cell is in service to something bigger than itself. By contrast, in the phenomena of cancer, cells rebel. Cells take on their own pattern, their own initiative, and replicate, much like a virus, much like a wound within a larger ecology. They replicate. And the challenge, of course, with the isolated egoic replication independent of the host body is that cancer does grow very fast. But if it is successful in its taking over of the body, the flowering of the cancer's success is to kill its host, upon which it dies shortly after. In a cancerous relationship with the host body, one is out of sync with the ecology upon which we depend, upon the biological foundation upon which we depend, and the accumulation of our success in our dystopian and isolated, meaning we do whatever we want independent of the environment that hosts us, the accumulation of successfully completing the lifestyle that has nothing to do with the host body is to destroy those elements in the host body, the oxygen, the food, the cleanness in the water, etc., and to die with those elements of the host body. Because when one does not relate in partnership to the larger self upon which we depend, we die with the host that we kill. It is, in a sense, a suicide out of a delusion of separation. That delusion is challenged when you hold your breath for just 5 minutes. What's taken away is the link between all the plants that are supplying the oxygen, not just for you, but for the entire biological, animal kingdom and human kingdom. These threads that connect us, the energy body that is gifted and surrounds us, the connection with the larger energy body. We could call it spirit, we could call it any scientific name that would capture that dimension of energy. We do not have adequate instrumentation in many cases to do that well, but much like any cell, much like any infant, there is an umbilical cord that connects us to the larger biological body of our planet and universe, and the larger spirit body of the more subtle energies, both of which come together in the individual and in the body that is the species, much like the cellular connections within our body and the cellular connections between one human and another. Again, just try and pretend for a moment that you personally had to invent the loom, grow the cotton, create the red dye, learn what makes the red dye, ship the dye from this place to this place, stitch it together. And if one was in isolation, one could spend an entire lifetime just getting halfway to the point of making one cotton turtleneck shirt of this nature. Because the abundance that we create, what takes a lifetime's of work, inventing the idea of clothing, inventing the word for clothing, inventing the word for dye, inventing what takes more than a lifetime to do alone, is done with one tap on a digital interface that sees energy called money going over here and a package called a red turtleneck arriving a few days later. The abundance that comes from the synergy of the species is literally in 1,000,000 times greater than the abundance of the individual, in as simple as the landscape of thought, which is predicated on the landscape of language. You cannot think a thought without language, and that language was gifted to you by other human beings. And in receiving that gift, the gift of being able to think, to make distinctions between this, and combine them in different patterns called thought. In the birthing process and the maturation process, particularly in a traumatically and emotionally illiterate culture, the infant, the young one, is exposed to the fear of death, in the hatred of their parents, in the overwhelming force of nature that is vastly bigger than the self, be it on the high seas, the power of a waterfall, a tree falling down, a forest fire, in the exposure to the dynamic force of the larger body. Every ego faces the fear of death. And in a traumatically illiterate culture, that awareness that I could die and that there's nothing I can do about it, and that I'm terrified of dying, that I'm terrified of feeling that level of pain again, is coped with in what's called traumatic dissociation. This is where we black out a memory. We disconnect from our body. We refuse to look at the possibility that a marriage could end, that our parents could divorce, that our brother really could rape us, that we really could be ganged up and humiliated in front of the whole school. Overwhelming pain, the awareness that we could die, the awareness that we could die feeling alone and isolated, in a framework, in a culture, in which so much of us goes unseen, goes unacknowledged. Creates these cuts, these traumatic dissociation and pain management strategy. The cut is the wound, the awareness and the visceral experience. I'm going to die. I can't help it. There's nothing I can do. I feel all alone here. I cannot face this level of pain. I cannot look as a fragile ego into the face of such overwhelming cruelty, such overwhelming energy, such overwhelming force. I cannot look into that and survive as myself. And I do not know, I have forgotten, I have lost the connection to the larger self that I've been isolated from in order to belong to a materialistic, reductionistic, scientific cult in which I am defined by my body, a body that I cannot protect against the overwhelming force of a waterfall, against the 30-foot waves flipping my dinghy, the tidal wave that's rushing through my village, the forest fire that's going through here, the car racing towards me at 80 miles an hour. I cannot protect this body with the isolated framework of the human ego I have been given to steer this body through life. And I cannot face death. I cannot face the obliteration of all that I know that I am. And so we cut, we dissociate from these moments of trauma. We block them out, bury them, run from them. And in that running, we form a bottom line. We form any number of rigid, strong beliefs, but we form a bottom line. I'm never going to love again and face that horror. I'm never going to feel this helpless again. I'm never going to let anyone have that kind of power over me. I'm never going to drive again. Whatever it is that protects us from confronting the possibility of our death, of the death of the human ego, of the human body, and of the helplessness to stop the pain, to stop the terror of that amount of pain. We form a bottom line that helps us get through the day while still being incapable of facing that degree of pain, that degree of wound. And these are the cuts to the larger physical body, the cuts to the larger spiritual body. They are the wound, the blockade. In the dissociation, we have to sever a connection with a part of ourself that is living in that trauma. Because it's all us, and some part of us did feel that helpless and did feel that overwhelmed and did feel that alone and is expecting to die. Some part of us may be dying in that wound. And we feel incapable, like the best friend in school, of the one who is being targeted for bullying. We feel incapable of extracting that part of ourself out of the bullying dynamic, out of the wound. And so we abandon it. We turn away from our best friend. No, he's no friend of mine because I do not want to become the target for the bullying. I'm surviving by denying a part of who I am, by disowning the wound. Now, we survive. The pain goes down. But there's a growing pattern when we turn away and avoid our wound, when we cannot face the death that comes too quickly, too violently, too overwhelmingly into our infant consciousness. More and more energy must be allocated to partition that part of the self. You can think of it like the force of life that wants to integrate who we are. One could think of it like a seedling of a redwood tree. It wants every little bit of moisture it gets. It wants to grow up. It wants to become a giant tree. It wants to come back to consciousness. It wants to erupt into the psyche and be integrated. But we are associating that domain of the self with our destruction, with our death, with the end of things as we know it, with an unsurvivable encounter with the unknown. And so we push it away some more. Then we have to push people away who remind us of the wound. People who trigger the wound have to be managed and pushed away. People can't be let in here because then they might trigger the wound. We can't tell the truth in this area because then it would imply the truth in this other area, and that would take our consciousness too close to the wound, so we have to hide the truth. The wound, or the psyche, grows. When the wound grows, we need to spend more and more money on defense in order to defend the defense, because the defense is always falling down to reveal the truth of this part of ourself. We have to spend more and more energy to put up more and more walls. And then we have to defend the crews that are building the walls from suspicion, like, why are you becoming a military fortress? Well, we got to shut those people down and spend this. And there just gets a larger and larger proportion of the psyche is dedicated to defending the defense structure, which is dedicated to defending from the fear, which is dedicated to defending from the pain, which is dedicated to alerting us of this life-threatening perception of trauma that seems too big to face. Well, in the initiation of a young man, of a young woman, in many of our ancestral tribes, we understood that there were two deities. There was the deity of the integrated self. There was the deity of transcendence, that part of us which we are becoming, that part of us that is a part of a larger biological and energetic framework. And the service, the sublimation, the free expression of our human autonomy towards partnering with something bigger than ourselves in a way that honors something bigger in ourselves that we are becoming. And that this is one of the paths. And this is the path towards the light deity. And we also understood the deity of pain. The deity of pain has with it the bottom line, the dark law that says no matter what, whatever the cost. I don't care the price financially. I don't care how many people's lives I have to destroy. I don't care what I have to do. I am not going to face that level of pain. And with that, I'm not going to face my fear of that level of pain. First comes the pain. Then comes the helplessness to resolve the pain. That's the nature of trauma. It's not traumatic if you understand that the kitchen stove burns and you put your hand a little close, gets hot, and you pull it back. That's not traumatic. You have control in that environment. But in a raging forest fire that's racing towards you at 200 miles an hour, that did not give fair warning that you do not have the ability to survive without sheer dumb luck. That is trauma. That is overwhelming energy. The hatred of a parent in the face. It may even not be directed towards you. But if two spouses are fighting and they are 30-foot giants and you, a helpless ball of overwhelm and fear, unable to do anything but depend on these giants for food. If these giants are raging at one another in hatred and fear and trauma, and you start screaming and they look down at you with that rage and with that hatred, the distraction, the anger and helplessness they feel, the parts of them that hate themselves that they're not better parents, the parts of them that hate you for reminding them that you're not better parents. When you see the full furnace of that rage, and you understand, if you get between them and their addictive rage, you're dead. You can't survive. There's nothing you can do. There is an overwhelming helplessness. There is a grief. There is a shock. And we sever the connections with our body, with our awareness, to survive the trauma, to survive the ordeal. Now, in more civilized cultures, we understood that by the time someone is 10, 11, 12 years old, they have faced humiliation, they have faced death, they have faced fear. Fear and death and shame and humiliation and pain that as a child they could not deal with other than to turn away, to block out, to refuse to remember, to lie, to cover for the abuser. We understood that they had made bargains with the dark deity. I never want to feel that again. What do I have to do? Well, you have to lie about this. Well, you have to avoid this person who brings it up. Well, you can never love fully because it opens your heart too much and you may connect with that trauma. And we understood that people who serve the deity of the wound, we pray with our time, money, attention, and energy. We pray to the deities that we are afraid of, that we are determined to avoid, or we pray to the deities we are becoming in the higher truths of joy, of innocence, of interconnectedness, of transparency, of freedom, of responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond and co-create the world that is the most fun for us to inhabit. The higher truth of where we are becoming. We pray with each action to one or the other deities within ourselves. The person whose greatest fear is to be all alone, poor, penniless, humiliated, in a corrupt power structure, cannot afford to take a stand for the child. If they're in the role of a teacher, and they understand that the parent is donating money to the highfalutin school, and they understand that the parent is abusing that child, they understand that it is political suicide to take a stand for the child they are responsible for caring for. So they tell the child, you have great parents and look the other way. They're bowing to their terror. And they're getting as far away from that terror as possible, maybe climbing the social ranking system, the political hierarchical system, the money system, climbing as far away from their terror as possible, out of terror, out of sheer shame, out of desperation. I never want to be poor because I can't face feeling worthless in a cult that values people as less than money. I will do whatever it takes to avoid being poor. They may be very wealthy, but it's all in the prayer of terror. They're not doing that out of an expression, because it's not about the money, it's about the deity that you're bowing to. It's about why you're doing what you're doing. Is it to get as far away as possible from the fear that you can't deal with, the shame that you can't deal with, the trauma you can't deal with? Is it part of the dark law? I'm never going to let anyone be able to control me again, so I'm going to be a control fanatic billionaire that bosses and controls everyone, because that's the best way that I can pray to my bottom line. Never again will I let two helpless, incompetent parents terrorize me in helpless states of trauma for year after year, hour after hour of timeless drama that I can do nothing about. And so I'm motivated, I'm determined out of my law, my wound, that I will do whatever it takes. One can look at the drama of the 9/11 response and the shame response. How many freedoms do we have to give up? How many countries do we need to invade? How many weddings do we need to bomb? How many lies do we need to tell? How much mass surveillance? And how many truth tellers do we need to lock up and imprison in order to serve the dark law that says we're never going to feel so helpless on our own soil? A couple of planes, a few $1 trillion later, as the dark law repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats, to now we need to redefine what journalism is so that we can arrest and torture journalists that bring us the truth. Very few of them daring to do so, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden being among those journalists, among the people, bringing awareness to taboo truths. Are we going to become our best potential? Are we going to reconnect to the larger frame of the species? Or are we going to dominate out of fear, out of shame, out of intimidation, spending 25 times more money in domination and bombs of fear, etc., to protect ourselves from the vulnerability of being hurt, of feeling helpless. We understood in tribal culture that a man, a culture, a country was not safe until they could face their trauma, until they could face their deepest pain, their deepest terror, and transcend it to become an adult. That it was, by definition, the child and the adolescent that would do anything at all, to avoid facing certain emotions at certain intensities, certain truths, would do anything at all, including destroying the family, committing suicide, whatever. It was too terrifying for the ego of a child and adolescent to face the truth of their parents' incest, to face the truth of the hatred that was directed towards them, the negligence, the incompetence of the world around them. It was too fucking scary. Until we have faced the pain that in childhood we decided we would do anything not to face, we are by default praying to the deity of the wound. In the mythology of King George, in the mythology of the dragon, you have the dragon, which represents the reptilian brainstem. We all have a 200 million year old reptile living inside of us that is designed to manage trauma with fight, flight, or freeze in a sociopathic and disconnected ethic of survival, and that's it. There's no principles, there's no empathy in the reptilian brain. It's fight, flight, or freeze. And when there are fears in our reptilian brainstem that our consciousness is too afraid to confront, we pay tribute to the dragon. It's usually reflected by young virgins. That which is most innocent and true and beautiful within the psyche is sacrificed to the reptilian brain in appeasement. Every night, the dragon says, you must leave an innocent one, a part of the psyche that has done nothing wrong, and I will devour it. And the dragon grows stronger, more bold, more confident. The reptilian brain sets in its habit because it becomes a life of placating our fears. I'm terrified, but I can't face my terror. I'm terrified of pain, but I can't face my pain. I'm terrified of shame, but I can't survive an encounter with my shame. So I ask my shame, my fear, my pain, what do you need from me? How can I satisfy you so you will not make yourself known to me, so that I can pretend you don't exist? And it asks a price. Some of our innocence, some of our enthusiasm, some of our capacity to love, some of our truth-telling. In essence, it asks for the virginal feminine in the psyche to be left alone, unprotected by the villagers, so that the dragon, the reptilian brainstem, can devour it. This is a spiral in which death, in which pain, in which fear grows by consuming life, by consuming innocence, the young one, the new hope, the wonder of feminine energy, the vitality is consumed to satiate the dragon. And what our elders understood was that before a young man, a young woman, could be trusted and trustworthy to guard and steward the tribe, to be real leaders, that they must face their deepest fear. They must face their deepest shame. They must face their deepest pain. And they must walk into death to protect the innocents. You see, in the corrupt culture, no one will confront the dragon, and no one will protect the young ones. No one will protect the innocents. No one will protect the feminine. Instead, it is offered to appease that which we fear. Now, in the transformative myth of St. George, King George, whatever the mythology, we have the healthy masculine coming forward and saying, "Not on my watch. I will risk death to face the dragon that you are giving your children to feed in appeasement. Do not send the innocents, the feminine, the children, our hope and possibility, to the slaughterhouse to protect against feeling your fear. Send your cowardice to the slaughterhouse and protect the truth. Protect that which is most vital and beautiful within you. Slay the dragon." And by slaying the dragon, what we're slaying is the addiction, the fear. We're slaying the part of ourselves. We're tearing up the contract with the bottom line that says, I will do anything to avoid dealing with this level of pain. Whatever it takes, kill my children, lie to my children, cheat on my wife. I will do anything rather than feel this intensity of pain. We are killing that bargain with the dark deity formed in childhood to survive. Often with the abuser, as the child asks the abusive parent, "What do I have to think, say, and do in order not to be killed by you? You who are a giant. You who can end my life any day. You who are the supposed protector and provider, but are the abuser and violator. What do I have to do to make an alliance?" And often this is the bargain. You must submit to my incest. You must submit to my lies. You must submit to my beatings. 1. And 2, you have to say that it's fine, that I'm a great parent. And 3, you have to pretend what I'm pretending to manage my own cowardice. I'm pretending that this is no big deal, that I got even worse with my parents, and so you're going to make it through. It doesn't matter. You've got to join me in all of that. If you do that, I'll grudgingly let you grow up with some envy, with some hatred, with a few hurdles in your path, because I'm still stuck in the wound of my parents. I haven't opened my abuse contract. I'm not yet free, and I don't want you to be either. I don't want to be left in this pain and wound all alone. And I signed a bargain with my abusive parents never to call this stuff abuse, to keep burying it. And so the child delivers up a part of their innocence every day to the abuser and is silent and pretends it's no big deal, as that innocence is gutted, roasted, and devoured in the cannibalism of the abusive, the envious, the enraged parent. And so by the time it comes to the village sacrificing a virginal girl for the dragon, it's just business as usual. St. George killed the dragon to protect the child, to protect the innocence of the psyche. And it is that phenomena of pivoting from an abuse culture that satiates its reptilian brainstem with constant sacrifice of that which is most beautiful within the psyche, the dreams, the wonder, the hopes, the enthusiasms, the joy, the innocence, the laughter. All of that is given up to feed the traumatic brainstem. There is no laughter and sincere joy in the sacrificial lamb given to trauma. And there is no true peace in the grown-ups who lack the maturity and adulthood to stop the sacrifice. There is sadness and grief in every person's eyes as that which is most hopeful within the psyche is sent off to the doomsday machine of our education system that produces cynics, that produces dissociated addicts lost in a maze of stupidity and self-hatred coming out the other side. People who feel so frustrated and helpless, they're cutting themselves. And yet we submit, we send off the next generation to the bloody machine that grinds up the psyche and spits out waste the other end, called growing up, and look fondly back at the idea of a childhood that many never really had, because it destroys us, it eats us up. The amount of pain that we feel escalates exponentially as it dawns on us, as we look at our life and say, I am the one who stands idly by as that which is most sacred, that which is most beautiful, that which is most innocent, that which is most good and true, is fed to the dragon. Our native elders understood the damage that leaders in this sacrificial protocol could do to a culture, that it becomes a cannibalistic culture that feeds on itself, where that which is most base feeds on that which is most beautiful. And that this, in a sense, was the pivot point within the human probability field, in the distinction between devolution and evolution, of that which is animal in us becoming light, becoming conscious, lifting into the joy, into the beauty, into the wonder, into the excellence of our energetic possibility, our transcendent possibility. And the process of binding up in fear, in hatred, in shame, in self-loathing, and in unconsciousness. Being aware only enough to be aware that we are ashamed of what we see of ourselves, and in that way in more pain than the animals that just do their thing, largely in flow and in balance with the larger ecology. And thus the importance of initiation. Initiation was a ritual, is a ritual, in which, in order to make the passage into the adult psyche, the one who will never sacrifice their child to the cult, to the culture, but will in fact slay the culture to protect their child, who will never feed their child to the dragon, but will die if necessary in a hero's journey to confront the dragon, to survive the dragon, to communicate to the child, you are valuable, you are worth fighting for, you are worth dying for. Know in yourself what I know as I risk my life to protect you. The worthlessness that so many of our children feel, an echo of the worthlessness we gave to such tribes by refusing to honor the dignity in their wisdom, as we violate Native American treaties, indigenous peoples, the right to their living, disrupting the symbiotic balance with their environment. As we judge that to be inferior, we act consistent with that violation, with that ignorance, and we learn nothing from them. A young Native American felt no worthlessness, no lack of meaning, no despondency and hopelessness about living. How could they? How could they when people would willingly sacrifice their lives to protect them, would see in them the one strong enough to face the deepest pain, the deepest fear, and would provide a map through dreams, through visions, through time in nature, through time with the elders. It was a map of beauty, a map of transcendent, a map into the larger sense of the self. So what is this initiation process? What does it look like? If in a culture with no initiation, if in a culture in which addiction, alcohol, smoking, promiscuous sex, crime and violation is the passage from childhood to grown-uphood, without knowing what an adult is, in a culture that has lost its way, how do we initiate ourselves into the one who will ride to their death if need be to slay the dragon, rather than the one who looks at who to blame, at the shame of being unable and unwilling to grapple with the truth and to face this monumental choice. Do we go to the point where we fear death and transcend it? Or do we turn away? And then turn away from our turning away, and then turning away from our turning away, and then numb the pain with more addictions around the bitterness that we are the one who turned away? Do we create more and more pain, more and more isolation, more and more separation, requiring more and more anesthetics, more and more numbness to manage the pain of such isolation? Going deeper and deeper into the endless maze of our insanity. Emerging, if we emerge at all, as scared children who will betray their siblings, their country, their soul, to avoid facing the horror they met in that cavern, and who are empowered to run the country, to lead the future, without knowing what leadership is. Acknowledging the wound is the first step. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of grief, some additional stages: blame, self-pity, helplessness. Acknowledging the wound brings up the grief of the wound, the grief of not being able to deal with it, the grief of living in a culture that doesn't deal with it, the grief of the consequences of our turning away, the grief of so much of life that has passed us by because we were not initiated for so many of us. Acknowledge the pain. This is how it felt to face this terrain in my family, in my culture, in my school. This is how it felt to be right at the edge of pain that was too big to deal with. Acknowledge the helplessness. This is what it feels like to be 5 years old surrounded by giants who are not initiated, who will throw me to the dragon if they have to decide between facing their deepest pain and throwing me to the dragon. Who leave me with the awareness of my worthlessness because they would do anything to me. They would violate anything in me if it was necessary to help them manage the shame that they don't have the courage to put into words in a shadow-averse taboo culture of silence and secrets. Acknowledge the bottom line. I will do anything to avoid this, just like my parents, just like my president, just like my military. Bullying, tormenting, bombing innocent civilians, rather than risk the shame of making a mistake, something that is human. 2, if you have the courage to face the dragon this far, to face the grief and pain in this terrain, what's the cost of your avoidance pattern? What's the cost of your dissociation and pain management and addiction? What have you lost? What beauty have you given up to your abuser? The cost of avoiding. Owning the cost. This is how expensive. This is what my life feels like. I am not proud of myself. I don't have self-esteem. I'm in a continual maze of fear. The cost of avoiding the trauma, the pain, of remaining emotionally illiterate. Third step, to own the power to choose. To own that we, at 3 years old, 5 years old, instinctively grasping, etc., said, whatever it takes, whatever you need to stop hating me, take it, do it. I'll agree to the abuse contract, just don't make me feel this. That is unfair, that is cruel, that is unkind and cowardly, as giving that choice to a 3-year-old is. We were given that choice. And understanding the necessity of survival as the first hierarchy of need. Survival, security, love, and belonging. That to get these three, we needed to participate to the degree we were required to in an abusive cult to grow up, to get through the day, to get through to 10, 12, 14, to be able to get to the point where we could think that some part of us wanted to live in this traumatic environment enough to agree to the contract with the abuser, the contract with the cult, the contract with the government, the contract with the parental system, the contract with the military. It is a contract in many ways that includes violation, but it also includes certain gifts. And we made that choice to be here. And the choice to face the dragon as opposed to continue the bottom line is here in the present moment. Now, owning that the choice is here in the present moment does not mean we are required to reverse the choice this instant. But it is owning that the choice is here. And there's an important process at this stage that comes in the ownership. I am the one who decides how much to let myself be abused, how much to sacrifice my innocence, my femininity, etc., to avoid shame, to avoid facing shame, to avoid pain, to avoid trauma, to avoid looking bad, to avoid getting fired in an abusive work situation. I'm the one who is choosing this. And as a child, I chose to give up what it took to survive. We were given a wound from a parent, from a culture. And that wound had a very particular flavor. It had a specific pattern. And here's the thing to know at this. One, as long as we are a child, the wound is too big for us. The child and the adolescent must sacrifice the virginal self to the dragon in a cult that does not support them. It's too big. You're surrounded by cowards. If the virginal maiden won't go willingly, they're too scared to face the dragon. They'll drag her up there with pitchforks, hand and bound. You can't fight an entire village. The child, the adolescent, cannot fight a culture. The child and adolescent is too small. So there's an alchemy going on in this process, where by the time that you choose to face the dragon, you've found a strength, a willingness to face death that you did not have in childhood. And it is often given by the wound itself. An example. If you have watched, you give the most beautiful romantic relationship of your life to the cult. You see, the cult said, you're supposed to work 9 to 5, you're supposed to get, have kids, you're supposed to have 2.5 cars, you're supposed to do this and this and this and this and this. But that's not what your heart needed. That's not what your body needed. That's not what your love needed. But you did it anyway, and you lost that love of your life, following the script of the cult, following the fear. I don't want to be different. I want to fit in. I never want to face that unknown terrain. I'll do whatever it takes. I will lose the love of my life. I will lose the relationship with my child. I will lose my dignity. And you've watched that. The wound is one of sacrificing what is most dear. Well, at a certain point in that process of sacrifice, you may discover the one in you that says, trained by the wound itself, I would rather die physically than continue to live a lie of betrayal. I'd rather face all the public humiliation, I'd rather face anything than go to my grave as I seem to be going, without ever taking a stand for what is most beautiful, true, and good in me or in another. So the wound creates a pain, and the pain provides a perspective. And at some point, you realize it's more painful to die a coward than it is to fail. And the hero's journey is not guaranteed. The return is not guaranteed. If you make the start to begin the hero's journey, for example, some of our native ancestors, around the time of 12 or so, maybe 13, would send their young ones out into the wild and say, come back in a month. You are not welcome here if you come back in less than a month. And if you come back in a month, you will have faced death. You will be an adult by the fact you are still alive. A very crude, a very brutal initiation. Not much spiritual guidance, transcendence, visions of the ancients. But nonetheless, you've now faced death. You can be trusted. You are now an ally of this group. And if you can't, who needs you? A little chop there. Be valuable or die. There is a brutality, there's a kindness in that journey. In our more modern world, the facing of death is far more esoteric. The deepest pains are in our earliest childhood memories, as parts of us get sublimated, denied, lied to, betrayed. As the innocence of loving both parents gets corrupted into understanding that Dad will be enraged if we speak about the affair, or Mom will be disgusted that we told Dad this or that, so we get co-opted into the parents' secrets, and we understand that love is not the goal here, that there's a petty power game of two teenagers in grown-up bodies, and that our only use, if we have any at all, is to the extent that we can be munitions in a game in which no one wins, and the winning is so tiny, the little petty ego victories, that there's a sense, is this all there is? Is this all my parents are capable of in an emotionally illiterate cult in which the mediocrity of their psyches is not even measured because Dad drives a Porsche and lives like a teenage fuck-up in the domain that we don't even measure. And he's told that he's cool, rather than being told he hasn't grown up and that he's missing out on the most vital journey in his life with a new opiate of the masses, materialistic goods that mean absolutely nothing and that squander not only a planet but a lifetime. But none of this is welcome. You're dealing with two teenagers. The teachers at school certainly aren't interested. As for your peers, this is weird. And so the journey is to face the grief and the heartbreak of understanding that your love, your truth, your belief in your parents is being given to the dragon. And what's being asked of you is to become a weapon. And if you want to exist at all, you want to have any sense of love and belonging or substitute words for it, it's going to be how well did you hurt Mom for Dad that day? That's how valuable you are to him. And how well did you hurt Dad for Mom that day? That's how valuable you are to her. Two cowards, two uninitiates, two children who are not worthy to be parents, but are given that right as long as they provide their vote. The politicians will cover up the inadequacy of the cult, the inadequacy of the parents, currying for a vote, for a leadership model that will be betrayed as definitely and predictably as the parent betrays the child. And the truth tellers, those snitches, right? The truth tellers will be imprisoned in the endless spiral of increased defense budgets, defending against who we are, defending against the one who we become on the other side of facing death. We chose the power is here. The wound is bigger than the child. Is a death. We are dying to face this wound. So there's a transformation, there's an alchemy. And there's something the wound has given us. There's something the wound has given us that as we face the wound, and as we face our power to face the wound, gives us the power to transcend the wound. If you're part of a political family and watch the cunning and backdoor rooms and bargains and shadowed negotiations that go on there, you may have the savvy to negotiate within your psyche. You in there that wants this, you in there wants this, you in there that wants this, you in there that wants this. Help me fight this dragon, and I will advocate for you as a true leader. There's something about the process of running. Perhaps we've run all our lives and figured out a sophistication of lies and defense that has given us a certain mastery, a dexterity as we face the wound. The wound is bigger than the child, is death for the child. We are the child. What's the resolution of the paradox? We have to find in that terror, in that moment, something bigger than the body, bigger than the person we think ourselves to be. We must reconnect with the source, the larger physical body that is the planet, the grounding that is the earth, the larger energetic body that is the spirit world. By facing the dissociation and reconnecting the flow, we are identifying with the larger part of us that is the earth, with the larger part of us that is our spirit, our soul. And it is that part of us that has the strength to face death, and it is that part of us that doesn't die whether or not our physical body dies in the confrontation process. Five, the determination to be powerful. To be powerful in our death is a wonderful scene in Dances with Wolves, where they celebrate the confrontation. They celebrate the moment. They celebrate the other human beings that bring them to their knees, that take them to the edge of pain. It is a good day to die. You take me to the limits of my pain. You take me to the limits of my body. You take me to the threshold of my death. But I do not die. It is a good day to die. I am born into some part bigger than I have known. And I reach up to my father, to my mother, who receive me. I am their son. I am the king who conquers death. I am not a slave any longer. I'm not a worm feeding myself to a dragon. It's a good day to die. This is but the beginning. The determination to be powerful is part of this journey. And it's part of the initiation from the terrified child, from the helpless and humiliated and enraged adolescent. It's so unfair. Fucking cowardly white people coming over here, shooting us. It's so unfair. The adolescent. To the beauty of transcendence. The beauty of transcendence. No one gets to decide who I am as a human being. It is noble to die on the hero's journey. That death in our times will often be psychological, as a higher octave of the death that is physical. The death of a certain amount of the victim, the death of a certain amount of our hatred and helplessness, to join the set of co-creators, to be part of a boundless field of energy that we can now flow through our body to cleanse the wound that we could not currently and formerly face, but now we can. And with that larger energy coming through us, we are not enough, but we've now identified with the larger body, with the synergy of which we are a part. And that is more than enough. We, the individual cell, is not enough. We, the larger body, is enough. It's a shift in identity, a maturity, a transcendence. Step into death, step into the unknown. When you muster, with the help of some of this restored connection, with the belief in our right to be a participant, we step into death, we step into the unknown. This is the teenage boy going into the dark caves in France and making their way through the birth canal, the spiritual birth canal. Will they live? It's not guaranteed. Will they ever be found again? It's not guaranteed. Can they go forward not knowing what's there? If they can't, they back out and come out a child. If they can, the birth is profound. They are an adult. Step into death, step into the unknown. In the facing of that, find resources bigger than the self. Identify and become the bigger self. Let the bigger self consume the terror that we have identified when we've identified with the wound. Emerge transcendent. In the restoration of trauma, we have restored the link through the base chakra and the seventh chakra. We've restored the link, where now we have the grounding and vitality of the entire earth able to flow up through us. And we have the wisdom. We have the possibility of dialogue with the vast, larger ecology that transcends our ability to imagine it. But we are in dialogue. We are in partnership with something bigger than ourselves. And as we become intimate, as we become familiar, our identity expands. And the way to transcend death is to be part of something bigger that grows through death and through life. When you identify as a species and you understand the function of death and its connection with new life and its process of transformation, and you love and feel at one with that species, as the body dies, you feel the species expand. And the focus becomes living a good life, living a life worth living, a life that will bring, well, it's in its crudest sense, one way to do it is follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Learn to survive. Learn to feel secure in that survival. Create love and belonging. Develop ideals of beauty, truth, goodness in your own unique ways and become that person. Grapple with the obstacles and become more as a result of those obstacles. Find your unique talents in the engagement with the obstacles. Develop talents in response to the trauma. For example, pattern recognition was something I learned because my parents hurt me and they lied about hurting me. And I couldn't deal with the hurt as a child. So I had to find a way to predict when they would hurt me. And I had to ignore what they said because what they said had nothing to do with what they did. So I had to find the pattern, when this one happens and that happens and this happens, then they hurt me. And then when this and this and this, then they hurt my sibling. When this and this and this. So I had to develop a pattern analyzing talent that is part of the talent out of the wound. It's a talent that allows me to transcend some of the mazes our cult builds for us. That becomes a talent that I can share in a video such as this. So the wound cripples us, but it often leads us to develop unique compensating strengths that can be leveraged. Warren Buffett, the greatest investor in many people's minds, was traumatized and abused to a point where he couldn't bond with other human beings. But he developed a dissociative passion for numbers and the mathematics of companies. And as a result, has been able to keep emotion out of his investing career. And the biggest fears in all investing are fear and greed. Fear and greed will kill the portfolio, the future of most investors. But the same sociopathic brutality that led Warren to disconnect from people led him to find something else that he could use to survive, an unemotional relationship with mathematics and investing, and become one of the greatest investors in the world. And out of the money of becoming one of the wealthier people in the world, donating more than half of his fortune to the Gates Foundation, another compensating dynamic, using the same analytics to apply a strategic response to things such as malaria and other things in that analytical framework. The need to develop a unique gift, to let it matter, to let it go out into the world. The need for abundance, to experience the success of we found this is my gift, I've developed it, and I've found the right niche for it, and then I've learned how to apply it in that niche. I've helped other people. Now I've created abundance for myself, abundance for those around me. And then the need to transcend this niche ego and identify and love something bigger than myself. These are human needs. And when we're stuck in the wound, we're stuck in survival, security, love, and belonging. We can't reach to esteem within the wound. Within the wound, making a bargain with our abuser. We can feel a sense of love and belonging. Our abuser wants us around as long as we sign the abuse contract. We're secure. The abuser needs someone to abuse. We understand how to be abused in that way. We're surviving. We're still alive. It's been decades. We're still here. But we can't go to esteem because no one aspires to be so frightened of pain, so frightened of the truth, so frightened of being worthless, That when the abuser keeps deluging them with the message, you're worthless, and that's why I'm going to abuse you and make you feel as worthless with me, that says, maybe I am. Maybe I'm that worthless. Self-esteem is the love that we earn by meeting our ideals of ourself. No one meets that ideal from a position that says, I guess I'll just let myself be abused and quietly go off with my tail between my legs because I'm not worth it. No one aspires to that. It's done out of shame and pain, which is why there's no self-esteem. So we're at level 3, maybe level 2. I don't feel loved and belong. I feel abused, but I'm relatively secure in my survival. Or I'm not. I'm just surviving. Who knows when my abuser will pick someone else to abuse and throw me out of their house, and I don't know how to cope. I haven't learned that. As an adult, it is to take ownership of our ability and willingness, with the entire support of the spirit world and the entire support of the planet, to meet our human needs. When we heal the trauma, we heal the cuts in the umbilical cord between the earth and the spirit world. We are letting blood flow into the system, which is giving us sustenance in life far beyond the ego's ability. And when we trust the boundless energy of the earth and the spirit, when we understand that when that blood is cut off, it is us saying, I can't deal with this. This is too intense. This is too much. I won't face that pain. Or I won't go gracefully into my death as an adult. I won't die to protect my child. I won't die to protect the vulnerability of my wife. I won't risk my image, my this. I won't die. I'm small. And so we turn away from the part of us that is transcendent, that will do it. And we'll do it again and do it again, because grace, beauty, truth, goodness, excellence are inevitable. As we transcend the human framework of time, we arrive at the pinnacle of this long algorithm of evolution and experimentation and creativity and change. We arrive at the pinnacle. We arrive at fun, at intelligence, at love, at courage, at beauty, at truth, at goodness. Because it's fun. Because when you have the mastery to traverse the entire psyche, these are fun places to hang out. And the most fun thing when you have mastery and certainty of your state is to bring more of you on board. But more of you means much bigger than your little ego identity by that point. More of you means other species, more of your species, more of this consciousness and this consciousness to facilitate the journey home, the journey towards beauty, towards fun, towards excellence, because it's more fun, because it is inevitable. You see, when you succeed and create magnificent beauty and have mastery of that state, you stay there because it's great and you develop more artistry with it. When you fail, you create pain. Pain wakes you up to the fact that this is not working. And so you try something else. And if you fail, pain wakes you up to that's not working. So eventually, just by pain alone and the fear, we stumble onto the path. Eventually, we all end up winning because pain is our teacher. Pain is saying, not that way, not that way, not that way, not that way. Pleasure, that way. Beauty, sustainable joy, excellence, it's fitting together. Oh my goodness, it's getting stronger that way. In that sense, it is inevitable. It's just how many lifetimes, how many journeys, how many deaths, how many challenges will it take us to arrive at that transcendent doorway where we have certainty and mastery of our state, and so we choose the state that is most beautiful, most excellent, most satisfying, which is what we have always referenced as the divine. It's not the divine, it's our rendition. It's our interpretation of what that perfect energy feels like. And it never feels like pain, humiliation, grief, misery, helplessness. It feels masterful. It may be more fun to feel self-pity than helpless pain, but it's way more fun to feel joy and beauty than it is to feel self-pity, so why do it? It always ends up in this connection of competency and love, mastery and beauty, fun and excellence, because excellence is fun, and fun is excellent. It comes together. But we have a structure, we have a consciousness level that creates pain and trauma, that has limitations. And so our journey home, our journey into adulthood, includes the facing of those, the learning from those, receiving, what's the message? What does that teach me? How can I integrate the power from that message? What does that pain have to teach me that I can take into my adulthood as I am now its master by refusing to pray and bow, to spend time, money, etc. to avoid pain rather than to spend time, money, and resources to create who I am and face the pain on the journey.